when a classroom becomes a stage for cruelty, and a teacher's laughter crushes a child's dream, the seeds of humiliation are planted deep. But years later, in a courtroom filled with silence, those very seeds will bloom into a lesson the teacher never saw coming. The story begins in a worn-out high school on the edge of town. The afternoon sun slanted through dusty windows, casting stripes of light across rows of desks where students scribbled notes half-heartedly. The faint buzz of fluorescent lights hummed overhead, broken only by the scrape of chalk on the board. At the back of the room sat Daniel Carter, a thin boy in hand-me-down clothes. His shoes were scuffed, his backpack patched more than once, but his eyes carried a fire that no poverty could dim. He rarely spoke in class, but when he did, it was with quiet conviction, like he knew something the others didn't. At the front of the room stood Mr. Whitaker, a man in his late 50s with a permanent frown etched into his face. His reputation wasn't built on inspiring students, but on mocking them, especially the ones who didn't fit his image of success. That afternoon, he decided Daniel would be his target. "All right, class," Whitaker said, dropping the chalk onto the tray with a clatter. "Let's talk about your futures. What do you want to be when you grow up?" Hands shot up. Doctor, engineer, architect. Each answer was met with a nod, sometimes a half-smile, never much more. Then Whitaker's eyes narrowed on the boy at the back. "You," he said, pointing his stick of chalk like a weapon. "Carter, what about you?" The room quieted, every head turning. Daniel shifted in his seat, his fingers tightening around his pencil. Finally, he lifted his chin. "I want to be a lawyer, sir." The silence lasted half a second before it broke into laughter. Not from the students, but from the teacher himself. Whitaker threw his head back, his laughter sharp and cruel, bouncing off the classroom walls like an insult that wouldn't end. "A lawyer," he sneered, eyes glittering with mockery. "Son, you can barely afford lunch. You think someone like you is going to stand in a courtroom? In a suit? Fighting cases?" He shook his head, smirking as the class chuckled nervously. "Dream smaller, Carter. Be realistic." The words hit harder than fists. Daniel lowered his gaze, but not in shame, in determination. He said nothing more, but in that silence, a promise was made. Years passed. The classroom, the laughter, the sting of those words, they stayed with him. He studied late into the night, worked jobs no one else wanted, clawed his way through college applications and law school exams. Every insult became fuel, every doubt became proof that he had to keep going. And then came the day. A courtroom in the city, packed with spectators. The air was thick with tension as a gavel struck wood, calling the room to order. At the defense table sat Daniel Carter, not the boy in patched clothes, but a man in a tailored suit, sharp eyes focused, confidence radiating with every measured breath. Across the room, the prosecutor shuffled his notes nervously, trying to steady his hands. The judge entered, robes flowing, face stern. Daniel rose respectfully. "Your Honor," he began, voice steady commanding, "the defense is ready." The case was complex, but Daniel's brilliance cut through the noise like a blade. His arguments were sharp, his questions precise, his presence undeniable. Every word carried weight, pulling the jury to his side. And then, as fate would have it, among the spectators in the back row sat an older man, slouched in his seat, eyes wide with disbelief. Mr. Whitaker. He hadn't recognized Daniel at first. But now, as he watched the young man command the room with eloquence and authority, his heart sank. The boy he had mocked, the boy he told to dream smaller, now stood as the very embodiment of that dream. When the verdict came, not guilty, the room erupted in whispers and gasps. Daniel shook his client's hand firmly, dignity radiating from every movement. As he turned to leave, his gaze swept across the room and landed on Whitaker. Their eyes met. For a moment, time stopped. The teacher who once laughed now found himself speechless, caught in the gravity of the very dream he had tried to crush. Daniel didn't smirk. He didn't gloat. He simply offered a calm, respectful nod, silent proof that respect doesn't need revenge, only results. Whitaker lowered his eyes, shame burning through him. Outside the courthouse, the sun bathed the steps in golden light as reporters swarmed Daniel with questions. But his voice carried beyond the microphones, beyond the headlines, to anyone who had ever been doubted, dismissed, or humiliated. "Dreams don't belong to those with privilege," he said. "They belong to anyone willing to fight for them. No one has the right to decide what you can or cannot become." The cameras flashed. The crowd applauded. And somewhere inside that applause, the echoes of an old classroom laugh were finally silenced. Because justice had been served, not just in the courtroom, but in life itself.